Okay, so here's the thing no one really wants to admit because it kind of ruins the narrative that everything is new and scary and uniquely broken. Now, parasocial relationships did not start with influencers. They just got rebranded and given ring lights and brand deals, and suddenly everyone's acting like attachment itself is some kind of modern pathology. Like, oh my god, you feel connected to a person you've never met. What is wrong with you? Babe, sit down. We have always been like this, like actually always. You think people in 2014 weren't forming intense one-sided emotional bonds with strangers on the internet? You think we were all just casually scrolling and not memorizing the posting patterns of some girl with a grayscale aesthetic blog who reblogged Lana Del Rey, lyrics and pictures of cigarettes at 3 a.m. like it was scripture? You think we didn't notice when she stopped posting? You think we didn't feel that weird hollow drop in our stomach, like something in the ecosystem had gone missing? Because we did. We absolutely did. And before that, it was forms before the polished feeds and the algorithmic curation and the verified check marks. There were usernames. Just usernames, no face, no voice. Just text and maybe a badly compressed JPEG in a signature, and somehow that made it worse. Or better, depending on how you look at it. Because when all you have is fragments, your brain fills in the rest. You don't just follow a person, you construct them there. It was always that one admin or that one user on a forum who just knew everything. They had thousands of posts. They answered questions with this effortless authority like they lived inside the code or the subculture, or whatever niche corner of the internet you found yourself in at 2:17 a.m. instead of sleeping, and you trusted them. Completely not because they showed you their life, but because they didn't. They were consistent, present, a voice that kept showing up in the same space as you over and over again until familiarity turned into something softer and more complicated. And then one day they just disappear, no goodbye post. No explanation, just gone, and suddenly the forum felt different. Quieter. Like someone turned the saturation down, people would speculate. Threads would pop up like, does anyone know what happened to underscore? And you'd read through them like you were investigating a missing person case, except you didn't even know their real name, just a username. An avatar. A typing style, and somehow that was enough to miss them. That's parasocial. It just didn't have a clean label yet. And then you move forward a little, and its blog's Tumblr specifically was like a factory for this kind of attachment because it blurred the line in a way that was almost impressive. You weren't just consuming someone, you were curating them into your own space, reblogging them, layering their thoughts with yours until your identity and theirs started to overlap in this weird collage, and some bloggers became not celebrities exactly, but something adjacent. You knew their takes, their favorite media, their sense of humor, the way they typed in all lowercase or capitalized words for emphasis, like they were shouting through the screen. You knew when they were going through something without them explicitly saying it because the tone would shift. The posts would get more abstract, more fragmented, or they'd just vanish for a week and come back with a single vague line like, anyway, and you'd read into it. Of course, you felt like you knew them, but if you really think about it, you didn't, not in a grounded real-world sense. You knew a version of them that existed entirely through curated expression, through what they chose to show and what they chose to leave out sound familiar. It's the same structure we see now with influencers, except now there's a face, a voice, a higher resolution illusion and scale. That's the real difference, because what used to be a few thousand people quietly orbiting around a blogger is now millions watching someone's daily routine in 4,000, but the mechanism is identical. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates attachment. Attachment creates the feeling of knowing even when you don't, and we keep acting like this is some kind of moral failure of the audience instead of just a very predictable human response to consistent presence. Like if someone shows up in your life every day in some form, your brain is going to log them as significant. It doesn't matter if that presence is physical or digital or somewhere in between. Your brain is not that picky. And the internet figured that out early, way before monetization, which is why those early figures feel so strange to look back on, because they didn't have anything to sell you. Not really, no sponsorships, no affiliate links. No carefully timed vulnerability arcs to boost engagement, just presence, and sometimes that made it feel more real. Or at least less transactional, which made the attachment feel purer, maybe. More confusing, definitely, because when someone disappeared back, then there was no closure. Number, taking a break from mental health. Posts with soft lighting and sad music. They just stopped existing in your world, and your brain didn't know what to do with that. So it did what it always does. It filled in the gaps, created narratives, turned a person into a myth, because that's easier than accepting that you never really knew them at all, and we still do that now. Constantly, we build these internal versions of people out of clips and captions and half-glimpsed moments. And then we react emotionally to those versions like they're complete, like they're whole. And sometimes we even get mad when the real person deviates from the version we built, which is a little unfair if you think about it, but also very human. So when people say parasocial relationships are this new phenomenon caused by influencers, it's just not accurate. Influencers industrialized it, optimized it, turned it into something measurable and profitable. But they didn't invent it. The groundwork was laid in quiet corners of the internet by people who never intended to become anything more than a username and a habit, and maybe that's why it feels so eerie, looking back, because those connections were never acknowledged as a category. They just existed. You were attached and you didn't have a word for it, so you called it liking someone's posts or being part of a community or just being online too much, which fair, and now we have the word, and suddenly it's this big scary thing people analyze and critique and diagnose, but the core hasn't changed. We are still the same people sitting in front of glowing screens, building emotional connections out of patterns and fragments and consistency, just scaled differently, faster, louder, more visible, but not new, never new. And honestly, I think part of the discomfort people feel now isn't because parasocial relationships exist, it's because they're easier to see. They've been dragged out of those dim little corners of forums and blogs and put under this harsh, bright light where everyone can point at them and go, look at that. That's weird, when before it was just, you're weird, your quiet attachment to some anonymous person who made your nights feel less empty. And maybe that's the part people miss, not the lack of awareness, but the intimacy of it, the small scale. The feeling that this strange one-sided connection belonged to you and a handful of others, instead of millions, because once something scales up, it loses that illusion of uniqueness, and illusion is kind of the whole point. So yeah, parasocial relationships didn't start with influencers. They started the moment we had the ability to encounter the same stranger over and over again without ever actually meeting them, which is basically the entire history of the internet. We've always been doing this. We just finally gave it a name and acted surprised. Like, we didn't build the conditions for it ourselves, which is very on brand for us if we're being honest.